Welcome to the Emergent Human, where we explore optimizing health, embodied spirituality, and post-conventional living. I'm Michael Osterlenk, a therapist, coach, and educator, and I'm your host. Shout out to Frederick Lowen from the Alexander Lowen Foundation Center for Bioenergetic Analysis, who I'm now working with as part of my own personal development work. You can learn more about the Lowen Foundation at lowenfoundation.org. Today's show is brought to you by Cosper Scafidi, an amazing body worker in the Northern Virginia area, who has integrated different somatic practices, including Rolfing, into his work. You can learn more about Cosper's work at cosperscafidi.com. Today's guest is Sean Sessel. Sean is the head of the Oculus Institute and a ferocious learner with a fervent belief in the ability of the individual to better themselves. Through the Awaken program, which shows people how to escape burnout jobs and craft careers that truly inspire them, Sean has found a means of enduring impact. Many thousands have been inspired by the introductory presentation, and Sean has personally worked with over 1,000 different people on solving the problems discussed therein, including entrepreneurs, Fortune 500 executives, and professional athletes. His career advice has been cited in numerous media outlets, including Business Insider and Ask Men. Good to see you, Sean.
Good to be here, Michael. Always a pleasure.
I always enjoy talking to you. And just for full disclosure, I've had some really fun conversations with you, and I've seen you teach, and I've actually got to know some of your clients. So this is not just a theoretical conversation. I've actually seen what you're able to do in life, in real life, which is really cool. And one of the things that stands out for me, and many things I like about you, is that you like new models and maps. Like, you have studied a lot of different psychological and spiritual systems. And not only do you study these systems, but you're an integrator. You bring them together for larger models and maps. And I'm really curious, when did that start going, arriving inside of you? Like, oh, this is really of interest to me. I like psychology. I like spirituality. I want to understand the human system.
Well, I think there's actually a couple of components to that. I think one is the analytical component and the framework component and the cognitive component, which has always been a part of me. That's my probably one of my prime superpowers, is to absorb, process, and transmit information. Yeah. I was the guy who had, when I was 4 years old, had dozens of transformers and had memorized how each of them move and do all this kind of stuff. I always loved knowledge and frameworks and categorization and connection and all that stuff. That's why I went to university and got an engineering degree, right? I'm actually published as a biomolecular engineer. So that's where that fundamental analytical framework came from. I started getting into psychology and spirituality in university. Psychology through, we had to take, distribution electives, and I found psychology to be the most interesting for a particular group. And spirituality, because I had a professor named Dr. Wood, who brought me into an esoteric school when I was 17, which is phenomenally early for such things. He was a humanities professor. Again, I ended up taking that class because of distributional requirements. So I used to think that they were horrible, and then after actually going through university, I'm like, distributional requirements, the best thing ever. So I was working, in consulting jobs. I was working in finance. And then eventually I figured out that my core function was to absorb, process, and transmit information. And so I was looking at how can I build a career based around that. And I didn't want to be a high school teacher. I'd already given up my chance to be a professor. And so then I realized that personal development and coaching is where it's at. And then, as I dove into that space, I'm the kind of person who always strives for excellence in everything that I apply myself to. And so I just, kept, learning more stuff, anything that, it's always fascinated me how humans work since I got into it in university, but being able to integrate that both from a, just pure pleasure standpoint, just enjoying learning it. And then also the applications of being able to go experiment, apply, figure out which maps make sense, figure out which maps don't really provide that much predictive value, seeing the connections between them. Because I do that in my work on a daily basis. It's given me a lot of experience as well as, theoretical understanding.
One model stands out, and we share this offline, that I was so excited when I heard you talk about it. The 8-circuit model, popularized by Timothy Leary, then Robert Anton Wilson, and then Antero Ali. You actually started talking about it, I think, one of your teachings maybe, and I was like, holy moly, I haven't heard that one in 30 years. How do you discover which models, maps, systems that you're really interested in exploring? Because that one's a very esoteric one, for sure. Really
Well,
cool, but esoteric.
I do a lot of esoteric stuff. I think that the foundation is, so if I had to group the fundamental toolboxes that I use in my work, I would group them into the psychology, psychotherapy kind of models, the more positive psychology stuff, and that's mostly around stuff like gratitude and empowerment. And this is where you'll get some kind of like new age, some kind of law of attraction stuff in there, which that's a well that's not too deep. You can get toolbox out of that without having to study it a lot. Then the whole neuro-linguistic programming school and stuff that's come out of Tony Robbins, and then the esoteric work, which spawned off of that esoteric school that I got brought into, and that's turned up many new leads. And so what happens is whenever I'm reading something, it will normally reference other things, right? Or I'll have somebody who's also interested in esoteric stuff. They'll be like, hey, Sean, have you looked at X? Right? And then I'll go take a look at it. In the case of the 8-circuit model that came from a specific reading list that I was, I had a client who was like, hey, Sean, I came across this really cool reading list by this guy, his curriculum. And so, it was several dozen books, but, I went through all of it. I read a lot. I generally, unless I'm like traveling or there's something, whatever, I'll generally allocate 2 to 3 hours a day for reading. And, I've read certainly over 1,000 books, I think coming up maybe on 2,000 now, I'm not entirely sure. So because of that, I just pick up a lot of information.
When you read, how do you retain the information? Do you just retain it by reading it? Do you do notes?
Yeah. No, I haven't taken notes since I was a freshman in high school.
Okay, you just can read and.
Yeah, I like when I was in university, I would go to class. I would not take notes. I would read the book. I would do the homework. I would never study for the exam because I already went through the material. Again, this is just one of my superpowers there, right? Yeah. That's why I was like, hey, let's build a career that leverages my superpower, because that makes sense.
Do you like to take courses, audio, video, in person, or is it mostly through reading?
Yeah, well, I like information in all its forms. I can get through things fastest by reading. I can read a lot faster than people can talk. That said, like right now I'm going through the Abraham courses, and loving it, right? Like I love new information in whatever form it arrives.
The Emergent Academy or some of the other programs?
Yeah, so I was doing the anti-fragility one, which has some videos missing, but I finished all the ones that aren't missing, and now I'm doing the epigenetics one.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah, all those programs are really good. And
I did the peptides one too, which is great.
That I'm not surprised, because I've heard you on various calls where you're very knowledgeable on the peptides. Yeah. So talk to me about your clientele. Like, who comes to you? What kind of issues or challenges? And using all these different frameworks and approaches, like how do you work with particular clients?
Yeah. So people come to me, they tend to come from one of two places. One is a moving towards place, which is, hey, I'm looking for something that really fulfills me. I'm looking for something that can really drive me, that really inspires me. I want a sense of purpose. The other is a moving away place, which is, hey, I'm burned out. I hate my job, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which is normally indicative of of those deeper issues, right? And so both roads lead to the same place. Also, occasionally I'll get people who have a sense of purpose already, and they just need some clarity around operationalizing it and how do I make this financially viable and stuff like that, which is kind of a little bit farther down the road. But all of these roads lead to the same place, right? Which is, going through this very, seemingly simple process of you get clear on the target, you build out a plan, including whatever bridges are necessary to maintain financial security, and then you execute the target, towards that target with a sense of, especially when it comes to persuasion, understanding marketing and sales, regardless of whether you're doing it from the perspective of interviewing as an employee or starting your own company or whatever, that root ability to persuade is something that most people are missing. And that's why things that they think are impossible aren't necessarily impossible. They just don't have the skill set to implement it yet. And so I help provide that skill set. Like at the end of the day, you only need three things to have a winning career. You need to be able to add value to your fellow human beings in some way or other. You need to be able to persuade them that you're capable of adding that value so that they'll pay you. And you need to be able to do so in a way that naturally aligns with your system, your modalities, and how you like to operate, and what brings you joy. And if you have those three things, you win.
With the latter one, do you think that people are born with a calling of sorts? Like you've mentioned a couple of superpowers you have, so obviously it kind of innate in you that you've cultivated them over time. But in terms of a calling and for work or career, do you find that to be a truth?
So I have a scale of 1 to 5 on this, actually, that a metric that I have people use. At the bottom is you have a job that's toxic, right? This is something that has a negative effect on your mental health, on your physical health, on your relationships. It's spilling over, it's creating issues. The second is something that's unfulfilling, right? And that's something where it's not an immediate cause of pain. It can build up to that if you have like this kind of splinter in your mind kind of thing. But it's really just like I go in and it's blah, but there's not much there. And like if I had more money, I just wouldn't do it, but I have to earn some money, so whatever. The third is a bridge job, which is something that's enjoyable for the short term, right? And you often have people who get into job hopping where let's just jump from like one job to one job, and it'll be great for the first like 6 or 12 months, and then because it's new and this and that, and it's better than what they had before, and then it'll fall off, right? That kind of thing. Level 4 is what I call a calling, which is something that you can do until you retire. That's how I define it. And I would say that most people have multiple callings that are available. And what I promise my my high ticket clients who are not in my premium mastermind is that we will get you to level 4. We will get you to something that you could happily do until you could retire. Now, I do believe that there is a level beyond that, which is destiny, which is it is the optimal career path for you. And at that level, like the universe is working with you and vice versa. That is harder to do. That is something we deal with in my premium mastermind, but that's the kind of thing where you would keep doing it after you retire. Like you don't even want to retire, right? So like for me with Oculus, I have no intention to retire. Like coaching is fun, right? I never intend to retire. I would get bored, right? So like that's destiny. And so that's a little bit different. But I mean, even to get somebody to something where they could joyfully do this job until retirement, that's something most people don't have, right? The actual statistics are 85% of people aren't happy with their jobs. There's 18% who are actively disengaged, which means they're openly fighting with their boss, some potentially sabotaging the company's mission, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You have 67% who are blasé, right? Which is that unfulfilling category. You have 15% of people who enjoy their jobs, but of those, the majority of them are in those bridge jobs where it's only temporary. So you're really looking at, based on my experience, talking with thousands of people, less than 5% of people who are in a calling or better, which I think is sad.
I could imagine an employer might want to hire you to help them figure out who to hire, because it could be like either a 4th or 5th level for the person, so they don't ruin the job. That's kind of horrible to think that even a small percentage of people like actually go into a company or organization and to try to mess with it.
Yeah, well, I think the criteria from Gallup for actively disengaged, the examples that they said were open conflicts with colleagues or bosses, sabotaging the company's mission, stealing office supplies, or embezzling money. Like those are some of the examples that they gave for that category. I'm like, well, damn.
Yeah, seriously.
That's not an employee that I want. But normally, if you're dealing with a job that's toxic, the issue normally isn't hiring the wrong person. It's normally that either the job is constructed in such a way that it's soul sucking,
okay,
or that the environment and the other people there have created a culture that's really problematic. Yeah. Because for most people, as long as you don't have those two things, you can at least get to unfulfilling. But, you know, I mean, like I had a client where like her boss was screaming at her, pressuring her to falsify financial statements and commit fraud. And I was like, why are you still there? Right? Like you need to quit, and you should probably send something to the authorities, get this guy arrested.
Yeah, I can. And actually leads me to my next question, because, you know, when you have people come to you for burnout, like they're in that toxic environment, they're mentally drained, they're emotionally drained, probably physically to a certain degree unhealthy, or at least heading in that direction. You know, how do you work with them just to get their physiology to a functional level, so that they then can start thinking like more clearly, and acting more from the heart or from the spirit, or however you might want to describe that approach?
Well, yeah. So the first thing you have to assess is where are they, right? So a lot of people, and I'll give the example of that client who was dealing with the boss who's pressuring her to commit financial fraud. The reason people end up in that situation is because they have a trauma response where they don't, normally it's stuff that happened in their childhood, and they tolerate a toxic work environment because they grew up in a toxic home environment. That's what they're used to, right? So there's if it's really that bad, there's normally something else going on. So again, if we go look at a metric, I have a 1 to 5 scale for this internal alignment, right? At the bottom, you have what's called a chaotic mindset, and these are people who are highly traumatized, who are massive depression, anxiety, can't necessarily function and get through a day if they get triggered, kind of thing.
Yep.
Of that, you have a fragmented mindset, which is, they can get through a day, they can always function, but like if you give them like, a month-long project or a 2-month-long project, they're probably not going to finish it because something else comes up and distracted and focused and all these other things, right? Kind of all over the place. Unfortunately, more than half of people are in either level 1 or level 2, which is unfortunate. Then you get to level 3, which is blocked, which is, most things are going well, but there's 1 or 2 areas where they keep running into the same thing over and over again, right? And it may be their career, it may be their romantic life, it may be, their fitness, whatever it is, right? There's some block there. Then above that, you get unified. So level 4 is this. You'll generally see this is people who've been in personal development for a while. They've gotten a fair amount of tools, and they can make progress towards any given goal that they want to. And then finally, at the highest level, you get people who are unshakable, which is, the world can be falling apart around them and they are unfazed. You and I have a mutual friend who was a special operator for 19 years and then, was in various intelligence agencies. And, there could be people shooting grenades at him and he will just, nope, got it, boom, go. Like that's
He'll finish his sandwich and then,
exactly. That's really uncommon. But depending on where people are on that scale, you're going to want to use different tools, right? So for example, if you're dealing with trauma, right, I have a whole document on psychological trauma, which in some cases refers out to outside practitioners. So for example, like I can teach someone how to do EMDR on themselves. That's not hard, but something like pace avoidance system psychomotor, you need a specialized practitioner for that, right? So somebody at the bottom, that's going to be the kind of stuff you're dealing with, as well as just like very basic gratitude and self-empowerment stuff. And, like, I don't like the term affirmations because people will use affirmations for things that are not true and that they don't believe. And that just fragments the psyche. But I'll say, okay, listen, find some stuff that is true that you're proud of and put references for it and think back to times you've actually done it. And that allows you to embody it a lot better than just staring in the mirror and saying, I am X, I am X, I am X. It's not the same thing. And then as you kind of go up that spectrum into the more fragmented and blocked thing, now you start dealing more with NLP tools, right? So, this is where like understanding your psychometrics can be really helpful. I've got a specific NLP module for specifically rewiring specific, thoughts, patterns, and behaviors. And this is where you also get into what I would call stuff like wisdom module stuff around basic premises around like acceptance, basic premises around what you can control and can't control, setting rules for living, like all that kind of stuff. And then once you start getting into that blocked area, if you want to get somebody from blocked to unified, now you're talking about esoteric work, right? And I have a whole system of esoteric work that I created, derived somewhat from an esoteric school that I was in, as mentioned earlier. But also, as I said, I brought an engineer's mind to it. So I looked at, hey, listen, what's missing, what's redundant, what can be taken out, what order do we need to put these in? That's a big thing in spirituality, is people just like pontificate without thinking about the order of concepts and how they're most easily absorbed by the human brain. So taking this understanding of psychology and pedagogy and learning and complexity and layering that in to create a system whereby people can reliably get from point A to point B, because that's not how spirituality works for most people. And then that's why it takes years or sometimes doesn't work at all, is because there's not a reliable, repeatable process and system to it. Yeah. Right. So depending on where people are, right, like I'll be doing that. And then of course, there's general personal development stuff. You mentioned physiology, right? Like I have a training on sleep where I brought a very, very skilled doctor friend on of mine to do a joint presentation on sleep. I've got, stuff on biohacking. I'm going to be updating that pretty soon with some cool stuff that I've learned over the past couple of years. And so, I've got stuff on relationships, just high level general stuff, because the human being is a complex system and you do want to affect all of that. But the core of my work is ultimately the esoteric stuff. That's the secret sauce that I haven't seen anywhere else.
So you talk about the five levels. Mm-hmm. Who comes to see you? Is it mostly the 3, 4, and 5, or do you have a mix?
Well, so somebody who's at level 5 generally doesn't need help, so they don't come.
That's a unified one, just so I'm clear.
No, level 5 would be like the unshakable.
Unshakable. Okay, that's okay.
Right?
That's
or in their career would be somebody who's in destiny. Okay. They're not going to come, right?
3 and 4. Got it. Okay.
Right. So a level 4 in internal alignment would be the unified. And they may very well come specifically if they're lower, like on the career fulfillment. Like if you have somebody who's like a 3 who's, in a bridge career, but they're a unified person, so they're into personal development, they know these tools work, right? They come, and they're in a bridge career and they're looking to get to a calling. That's sweet spot, perfect for me. But I get people from all across the thing, right? And so what I've done is I actually last year I created a low ticket information course that doesn't directly work with me, and that's designed for people who are more at like towards the bottom. So like if you're at level 1, putting you into a high ticket coaching program that you're not going to complete does not serve you. Right. And so I have a quiz for people so they can see where, and there are ultimately 3 metrics I look at. There's the career fulfillment metric, which is the first one we talked about. There's that internal alignment metric, and then there's the financial success metric, right? And so depending on where people are, right, like if you're struggling to pay your bills, I'm not going to try to sell you a high ticket coaching program because that's dumb, right? If you can't get through a high ticket coaching program, you're not going to complete it. I'm not going to sell it to you because that's dumb. Right. If somebody comes to me who's fragmented, I can get them out of fragmented and into blocked relatively quickly with like a prerequisite wisdom module. So it's like, okay, we can still talk about the high ticket thing, but if you're in chaotic, it's too far to bridge that gap. Mm-hmm. Right. And so, I don't want to offer people something that's not right for them. So depending on where people are on that quiz, it would be like, hey, this is where you are. And this is what's best for you personally right now. Is it best for you to do this info program, get yourself out of really the dumps, right? Maybe go work with, other practitioners if that's called for, increase your income with some of the tools that we have there for, bridge stuff. Because normally these things tend to correlate. You don't normally have somebody who's, in a financial poverty situation where they don't know if they can pay their rent, who's also in like a, really good internal alignment like this, and vice versa. You don't normally have somebody who's in a really, chaotic mental state who's like very financially successful. There's correlations on these things, right? So it's like, hey, let's get you up to where you need to be. And then we can talk about the high ticket stuff, because that's what's going to generally my promise with the high ticket stuff is that we're going to get you into, level 4 on everything. Right.
Well, first of all, I just got to say, I appreciate the integrity. Yeah. Because, like you, I've been in this field for a very, very long time. And there's a lot of people out there who are like, I'll sell you this high-end thing, even though you can barely pay your rent. So the fact that you want to see where people are at and help them to the next level, as opposed to like, I just want to make a buck off of you, is unfortunately rare in our field. And it's nice to hear. I'm not surprised, but it's nice to hear anyways.
Well, I mean, I've never been in this for the money, right? Not that I haven't made good money coaching. I have, but that was never the purpose. The purpose of this is because it's my function. It's my, my destiny, right? So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
always why I've been there to do it. And so if I'm compromising that, then I'm defeating the whole point to begin with.
Yeah. Well, no, I appreciate that. That's good.
So,
You've mentioned, various aspects of your program that have like 1 through 5 or 1 through 5 or 1 through 7, et cetera, et cetera. Like, okay, where would someone go and what are the different programs you offer? Because you've mentioned a few, but it'd be probably good just to kind of lay them out. Like, how do they find them? And what are the different programs that someone might want to explore in working with you?
So the main two are the Awaken nexus there, which is you've got the low ticket info course, which is called Awaken Prelude,
Okay.
right? So, again, if you go take the quiz, and I'll give you a link to the quiz at the end of this, it will tell you, whether or not that's a good fit for you or not. Above that is the full Awaken program, which is, personally working with me, going through the full psychohacking process, because the psychohacking isn't included in the prelude because that's not something that can be done as part of an info course. It requires supervision. And then above that, there's my premium mastermind, which is a year long, which is not just about career, it's about all aspects of life. And so, for example, we have a mutual friend, Sydney. She's been through that, which is
Successfully at that too.
What?
Successfully at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice.
Actually, there was one chapter she didn't complete. She completed all but one. But,
I'll call her out now.
yeah. Well, she's gonna come back and do it at some point. I do have another like stack that I don't market, but just like kind of new programs that I'm creating. There's one on personal finance, which is everything from money mindset to personal finance and financial decision making to investing to even designing trading strategies, because I've historically been pretty good at options trading. And then again, there's a prelude version of that, but I don't have all the marketing infrastructure set up for that. So if somebody's interested in that, then they'd have to shoot me an email at sean@oculusinstitute.com. I will say that the underlying internal technology of psychohacking and some of those other tools is the same. So even though the external goal of career versus finance may be different, the internal technology is the same, because if you don't have the internal human system properly aligned, I don't care what your external goal is. I don't care if it's losing weight or finding the love of your life or building a business. If you don't have that stuff like internally aligned, you're screwed. So I always couple the internal with the external, and then again, you've got a tier of like info course prelude stuff. You've got a tier of high ticket coaching, and then that all feeds into the premium mastermind.
Nice. We'll make sure to include links for all these different programs, except for the last one you mentioned, because they have to come to you directly. Is what I heard you say.
Yeah, because I don't have all the stuff set up on my website. It's because I just created it not that long ago.
Yeah, cool.
And I haven't marketed. I just sent it out to like former clients, and then I got a bunch of people signed up. And I was like, oh, cool.
Is your work mostly virtual, or can someone work with you in person? How does that work logistically?
Well, so I mean, I have clients from all over the country, and even some not from America. So because of that, the majority of it's done virtually. There's generally 3 channels. Let me take that back. There's 4 channels. There's the actual information that's in a coaching system that tells them what to do with the checklist and has all the files and stuff. Then there's direct email, specifically exercise review, where I'll review it and we'll go back and forth. Then we'll have a group session every week where people get on and, we can do trainings and people can ask questions. And that's always good, because having a group thing, people can hear questions that they wouldn't have thought of and all that kind of stuff. And then there's one-on-one. So if you're in a high ticket program, you get all of that, right? And you can book my policy on one-on-one is you can book as many one-on-one calls with me as you need to solve the problem, right? If you're booking calls though, and there's no problem to solve, or you're just not acting on the previous thing, that's a different story. And then, but I've only very rarely had that happen. And that's normally a sign of somebody who's trying to derive external motivation rather than generate internal motivation, which again, I will teach them how to do that. If I see that dependence arising, and it's normally something that happens kind of early on, and then it stops because they see what's going on. And then, if you're in like the prelude courses, then it's just the info, because there's not direct supervision, because at that price point, I can't justify that expenditure of time at that price point.
Yeah.
But I wanted to create something that was accessible for people. So
Thanks.
that's kind of the trade-off.
Awesome. So what's floating your boat these days? You always seem to have your fingers in lots of different things, studying all kinds of cool stuff. Let's name a few that are exciting you.
Well, so a mutual friend of ours, Dr. Micah Hamilton, recommended a book to me called 5 Personality Patterns, which is fascinating. So I've recently been applying that. I incorporated that into my trauma psychology document. I was able to map that with DISC, which is a core psychometric that I use. So that was really cool. I really got into neurochemistry last year, which was fun. I've recently been exploring stuff from the psychedelic facilitation angle. I've not charged anybody for sessions, but I have been trained as a facilitator by some people who have, a fair amount of experience in it. So, kind of looking at that as a modality, which I'm really hoping, that we will see some progress on the legalization of that, because it's something that certainly has the potential to accelerate somebody if they're in the right place. I have found that if you have people try to use it as a substitute for doing the internal work, that doesn't work very well. But if you have people who do the internal work and then use it to, accelerate and then properly do the integration after, you can get some pretty amazing results. So,
and just real quick, it's not a warning, but suggestion. You can't go do a weekend with a shaman and then you're a shaman on Monday.
Yeah,
it doesn't work that way. And as you say, I think it's really important. You have to do the work before, during, and after. And the integration is really important, including daily disciplines and practices.
Yeah, absolutely.
So American.
Yeah,
it was so American. Like, I'm going to do this one thing with a pill and boom, my life's going to change. I don't do any work after or before.
Right? It's actually funny because a lot of the experiences that are associated with psychedelics, I actually experienced far before I ever, without consuming them whatsoever, because of the esoteric work that I did and some of the various contemplative practices. So, for me, it wasn't an entirely old experience. There was definitely some freshness to it, but it was, I had a pretty strong preview of mystical experience because I'd done it without that. And so I don't want people to think that the best and only way to go about it is by forcing your system chemically. It can be helpful. It's like nitro on a car. It can be helpful to win a race. It can be helpful to go faster. But if the car engine itself is not functioning, then putting nitro in it is not going to help anything at all, right? So you got to do this internal work. And that's the thing, is that's hard work and people don't want to do it. And that's why, for my high ticket program, I'm not shy about the fact that I have a no refund policy on that, because I don't want people to, and this has helped a lot of clients who get to the hard part and then they don't have an out. So they have to go through. And then they're like, oh, I'm so glad that you held my feet to the fire. Yeah. Now, if there's some, I've had situations where, something comes up in somebody's life and it's blah, 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 blah. And it's not, remotely related. And then I'll make an executive decision. Yeah, sure. Totally understand. Right. Somebody gets, a major health issue or something. It's completely get it. But, people have to have skin in the game, I found, to really confront their demons.
I completely agree. I've had the experience because, I work for Mark at SealFit.
Yep.
Majority of the people who come there are really excited and want to do the work, but you always have those few who see the videos or read Mark's books or whatever. And they're like, oh yeah. And then you're like, here's all the stuff you actually have to do. I'm like, oh, I don't want to do it. Which is so different.
I want to be a SEAL without doing all the hard SEAL shit.
Exactly. It's really, humans are really funny. Yeah, that way. Yeah, especially Americans. Yeah.
So one thing before we get to the end, we haven't really walked through my framework, and I really would like to share that for how I get people to a career that is really good for them, for a calling.
Please, that'd be great.
Because I think that's something that is often misunderstood. Are you familiar with the Japanese concept of ikigai?
Yes, but probably not as much as you. So if you want to do the 101 quickly for our listening audience.
Yeah, well, yeah, the listeners may not be familiar with it, but you have basically it's the intersection of four things. It's what you're good at, what the world needs, what you enjoy, and what you can get paid for. And people are like, oh, just find the center point of that and life is good. The problem is that that's really hard to do. And so what I found is that you have to do it in order. And most people don't know the right order to do it.
Okay.
Most people start with what can make them money.
Okay.
That results in you climbing the wrong career ladder. And now you're up here and you've got golden handcuffs. And you're like, oh, well, now I want to change. What the fuck do I do now? Right. And there are ways to get around that. Like I have a thing called the career cube and, there's other like dream bridge techniques. So like I have a whole inventory of techniques for like, if you're in that position, like how to get you over there without messing with your financial security. So it's doable, but it's not optimal. Now, there's another big group of people that will go for what am I good at? Right. And they'll focus on that. Like I told you earlier, like, I built something around my superpower, but I didn't do it because I was good at it. I did it because I loved it. It's a big difference right there. Which we'll get to in a second. But normally when people are trying to like, I just want to find something that I'm good at, it's because they're starving for external validation. They have an external locus of judgment and generally don't have a strong sense of self, right? Which is indicative of more internal work needed to fix that. Right. So then that gets you down to what the world needs and what you love. And the truth is there's so many different things. You've got 8 billion people in the world, so many different needs out there that's too big an ocean. So you start with, what do you love? Right. And how do you get to that? I use psychometrics like the DISC and the motivators. Same provider that, if Tony Robbins was your personal coach, you'd be getting it from the same provider that I do. And then the other one though is authentic values. So in order to get someone's authentic values, you can't just, and I've seen a lot of coaches, will do this. They'll bring somebody in for a weekend seminar. They'll have them do a values determination exercise. They'll be like, oh yeah, where do you spend time? Where do you spend your money? What do you like to think about? All this kind of stuff. The problem with that is that you end up with two issues. One is you have inauthentic values where people have internalized something from somebody else and they think that that's them and they don't know the difference. And the second is you'll have fear-based or other moving away from values. So they'll be like, oh, financial security. But what's really driving that is this like terrible fear of being broke, right? Or they'll be like, like love and connection. But what's really behind it when you dig into it is actually they have a deep fear of being alone. And it's not actually moving towards the thing that they want. It's moving away from something they don't want. And so in order to get those out, you have to go through this deconditioning process, which is this esoteric work that I do. And I run clients through 3 to 6 months of deconditioning before I have them do their values.
Okay, good.
Right. And even then I still will have to pick out some stuff that's like moving away from, or that's, inauthentic. Right. And then we get this list and then we rank them in a totem pole. And I have a whole process for putting them in order, because sometimes the order is not what you think it is. Right. And now we have their authentic values in a totem pole ordered from highest to lowest, plus their psychometrics. Now we can really come up with a really good calling. And then from there, we can say, okay, now that we know that, let's operationalize it, right? How are we going to build that into something that, like who needs this? Who needs this thing? Like, what's the value proposition? Okay, great. Now we've met that second one, right? Now we say, how can we make money off of it? We put a marketing plan or, whatever around that. And then if you don't have the skills where you're good at that, you go learn the skills. So the order of the Ikigai starts with what you love, then what the world needs, then how do you make money, and then you get good at it, right? That's the way you do this properly, right? And then if we've got that whole target out there, very often it's something that is going to take years to build. So then we do kind of this, what I call this dream bridge planning process. So how do you get from where you are now to there with every step, both increasing your fulfillment and your finances? Every step, right? So there's not any, falling off and like all this kind of stuff to the best of our capability. I mean, there is a time when like, if you're going to go be an entrepreneur, you need to take a leap of faith and do that, right? But the goal is that by the time that we've come there, you have a solid marketing plan, you have all the resources in place, you have all the tools, you know everything. And so you're jumping from a place where you're likely to win fairly quickly, right? And so like, that's the process that I walk people through.
Man, I just trying to imagine how much time and effort you put in sitting down and writing all these things up. 'Cause it's so expansive and comprehensive. All the different areas of human life that you work with your clients through.
Yeah, I appreciate that. But the thing for me is it's fun. Like if I'm going for a walk, I'm thinking about stuff like this because
Yeah.
it's fun, right? Like, so, like the amount of time that I'm engaging, it's not work a lot of the time. Like it's something that fascinates me. It's like,
Your destiny.
Hmm?
It's your destiny.
Yeah, exactly. It's a friend who, from high school, and he always loved fish. He was diving, he had fish tanks at home. He just found fish fascinating, right? So he's scuba diving, he goes scuba diving with his dad and all this stuff. So he went to university, got a degree in biology. Then when he got a PhD in ichthyology, which is the study of fish. And so he publishes papers on fish, and for his work, he has to go scuba diving and look at the fish and count the things, do this kind of stuff. But for him, he loves it. He gets to spend all the time with his fish. He's so happy. So
That's awesome. Yeah, it'd be such a different world if more people were like your friend and you were just excited about what they do for a living. Because it obviously it's not only good for the people you engage with or your friends engage with in terms of his colleagues and stuff, but like coming home at the end of the day and being with a partner or a spouse or your friends and like being excited about life, as opposed to I just spent the last 10 hours having my soul drained.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Nice.
And like you've seen me at the retreats we've been to, right? Like, I generally come in with a pretty good degree of energy because what I do on a daily basis feeds me.
Yeah, definitely. So where can people find out about all these cool programs you offer?
So the best place for people to go. So first of all, is if you're looking at the career fulfillment stuff, which is like most of what I do, you want to go to www.oculusinstitute.com/purpose quiz. I'm going to type this here in the Zoom for you.
Okay.
And that will give them the quiz. And so you're going to be able to see where you fall on those three important metrics, right? Career fulfillment, financial success, and internal alignment. And it will tell you, where you are, what's holding you back from going to the next thing, all this kind of stuff. And then it will collate that also into like a general pyramid of like, what's your modality of going through life? Are you, struggling? Are you surviving? Are you striving? Or are you thriving? Right. And you'll get a PDF. This is all free, by the way. Right. You'll get a printout. It's just 100% free. It will also look at like what, different like toolboxes, what skills do you need to develop to move things to where they want to go. Right. And as I said, just go in there, answer the questions. It's not that long. It's like 20 something questions. They're multiple choice. It's really fast. It takes, like literally like 5 minutes, 10 minutes max if you're sitting there like pondering over everything, right? Put in your email, you will get a free report. And then at the end of that report, it will tell you what's the best fit. And it will either give you the link to go do the Awaken Prelude course and get yourself from the bottom to the middle, or it will give you a link to book a call to chat with me about whether or not it makes sense to do the high ticket Awaken program. So that quiz is definitely where you want to start. If you're interested in the personal finance side of things, as I said, I haven't built out all the infrastructure for that yet. But you can email me personally at sean@oculusinstitute.com and we can chat and we can make that work.
I'll have you send that to me separately because I'm not going to be able to pull off and engage in a conversation. I can't multitask. I did pull off the quiz, so that's cool. Cool. Oh, that's awesome, Sean. I'll make sure to include all this stuff in the show notes, links to your website and all that kind of great stuff. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I've always told you before, I always enjoy these conversations anyways. Unfortunately, none of them previous to this have been recorded, but I'm glad this was recorded for other people's benefits. So do check out Sean's work, and appreciate your time, Sean.
Thanks so much, Michael.
Take care, buddy.